settlers in 1492. Before the arrival of white settlers in 1492, there were around 5 million Indians in America. Yet by 1800, the number plummeted to 600,000, and by 1900, the number was only 200 and completely wiped out. Initially, the English were met with a mixture of fear and intrigue by the native tribes. Despite this, it was early aid from the natives that gave the settlers a fighting chance, enabling them to put down roots and establish the first English settlements on American soil. Trade emerged as the delicate lifeline connecting the New England colonists and the indigenous tribes. This partnership led to the flourishing of local economies, so much so that the Plymouth colony severed its financial umbilical cord to England within just 5 years of arriving in America. The settlers and the Native Americans established a distinctive trading system. This system blended the traditions of the Native Americans with the practices of the settlers. Native Americans supplied a variety of local resources, including animal skins, food, and crucial knowledge about the land and its ecosystems. In return, the settlers provided them with beads and wampum, which was a form of currency used by the settlers. However, their exchanges weren't only about physical items. There was a significant exchange of ideas as well. In fact, the spiritual conversations between these cultures were so profound that the first Bible in the New World was translated into the language and resources of the land. Measles, reservations. The 1800s gold rush brought even more devastation to the native tribes, bringing white settlers from every place known to man. Despite every established peace across the United States, covering about 2.3.
Interesting. So, I mean, that was pretty short. Let me just look at this one.
Engineers are interesting creatures. When they are interested in something, they show extraordinary concentration. We love engineers. Kyocera.
We know your to-do list is long. Just make sure self-care is on it. Because when you feel and look your best...
Once upon a time, the land was considered sacred, and native peoples of North America viewed themselves as children of the Wakan-Tankan, the great spirit that created all living things. The Sioux, among the main tribes that inhabited the Great Plains region, stood out for their social structure and bravery in combat. The Sioux ancestors reached the forest of north-central Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin from the Mississippi River shortly before 800. The Nakota dialect. The Lakota consisted of 7 tribal groups and were the largest of the 3 groups, occupying land in South and North Dakota. The Dakota lived mainly in Minnesota and Nebraska, while the smallest of the 3 groups, the Nakota, resided mostly in South Dakota, North Dakota, and Montana. The Sioux were a prideful people with a rich heritage. They were rulers of North American plains and grasslands, feared by other tribes from the Great Lakes region to the Rocky Mountains. They settled in western Minnesota, establishing a nomadic lifestyle on the plains. They used horses extensively, animals originally brought to the Americans by the Spanish in the 16th century. Their main source of food was buffalo meat. To assist in the buffalo hunt, the Sioux lived in tents that allowed them to move quickly and keep up with the annual migration of buffalo herds. While the Sioux were known as great warriors, the family was seen as the center of Sioux life. Children were called Wakanshin, which meant sacred being, and they were the center of their care. While monogamy was most practiced, Sioux men could marry more than one wife if he proved able to support them. The male and female roles were clearly defined, with men responsible for supporting and defending the family. Hunting was very seriously regarded, and infractions of hunting rules could lead to the offender suffering the razing of his tent or other property. The Sioux were deeply attached to spiritual practices. They believed that nature's sacred spirits brought visions and prophecies to help guide human actions. Religious dancing was common among the Sioux, and self-sacrifice rituals, inflicting wounds on themselves, affirmed their identity as warriors. This was also carried out as a sign of mourning for the death of a close relative or tribal chief. One common belief among Sioux communities is that the spirit of the deceased would travel to an afterlife. In traditional beliefs, this spiritual journey was widely believed to begin as soon as funeral procedures were complete, which took 4 days. The grieving family and friends would attend that 4-day wake to follow the spirit to its final resting place. War was another core Sioux principle. Men built their prestige through war. and warfare was reflected in their family's honor. The warriors were called Akachitas, and they mainly fought on horseback, having their main weapons bows and arrows, spears and hatchets. The Sioux Dakota entered an alliance with the French merchants at the end of the 17th century. The French were attempting to gain an advantage in the struggle for the North American fur trade against the English. The first reported encounter between the Sioux and the French occurred when explorers and traders Radisson and Des Groseilliers reached what is now Wisconsin during the winter of 1660. There was another indigenous group that traded with Europeans, the Ojibwe, who inhabited southern Canada's Great Lakes region. The Ojibwe were remarkable for their large population and expansionist tendencies, which led to conflict with neighboring tribes. The Sioux started to resent the Ojibwe trade with the French and other rival tribes, such as the Cree and Assiniboine. Tensions escalated in the 1720s and led to a drawn-out war in 1736. The Dakota Sioux lost their traditional lands around Leech Lake and Mille Lacs when they were forced south along the Mississippi River as a result of the battles. These conflicts within the tribes were also dangerous for European traders, regardless of which side they traded with. They were seen as enemies by the other. Still, trade with the French continued until the latter gave up on North America in 1763. The Europeans repeatedly attempted to create a truce between the warring tribes to protect their interests, but with limited success. As the United States developed into a nation, the American colonization of new lands became more frequent. The Sioux had many of their lands raided, and several peace treaties and negotiations were made and breached. Railways hired poachers in the 19th century to exterminate the buffalo herds to force the tribes onto reservations. As the buffalo almost quickly became extinct, both the Dakota and Lakota were forced to accept reservations set by the Americans in return for the rest of their land. Domestic cattle and corn were given to the Sioux in exchange for buffalo, making the Sioux dependent on the government for access to their basic food. The United States aimed for the treaties to encourage the Sioux to convert their nomadic hunting lifestyle to sedentary farming, as done by Europeans and Americans. By 1858, the Dakota Sioux had only a small patch of land along the Minnesota River, with no access to their traditional hunting grounds. They had to rely on treaty payoffs for their survival, often delayed. The enforced lifestyle change and vastly underpayments from the federal government wreaked financial hardship and increased social strains within the tribes. By 1862, many Sioux were famished and tensions peaked in the 1862 Dakota War. The first major showdown occurred in 1854 near Fort Laramie in Wyoming, where 19 American soldiers were killed. In retaliation, American troops killed about 100 Sioux at their camp in Nebraska in 1855 and arrested their chief. In 1866, the Red Clouds War was fought and ultimately ended in a treaty that granted the region known as the Black Hills in perpetuity to the Sioux. But the treaty was not honored by the United States in the 1870s. Gold miners swarmed into the region. Helpless and with no hope for a better fortune, the Sioux and other tribes formed the largest Indian camp ever seen by white men. Around 10,000 Indians, divided between men and women and children, tried to subsist in a place inadequate for all the families. Tired of the incessant harassment and violent retaliation, two tribal chiefs, the famous Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, managed to get the support of Sioux warriors and their allies. This led to a series of Indian attacks on cattle ranches and small towns owned by the American colonists. The American government appointed Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, under the command of the 7th Cavalry Regiment of the United States Army, to fight the Sioux and suppress the Indian attacks. Custer was known and hated by the Indians of several tribes already. He had a habit of attacking Indian camps when the warriors were absent and then murdered women and children. The ensuing fight became known as the Battle of Little Bighorn and went down in the history of the American West conquest. The Battle of Little Bighorn took place on June 25, 1876. The fight was a crushing victory for the Lakota Sioux. And their northern Cheyenne and Arapaho allies. The